Okay, so ASTM F963. Hopefully that will be quite interesting. So you all have a toy background, but just for those maybe you don't have it, I just want to explain the purpose of the standard. Before 2008, ASTM F963 has been a voluntary standard in the US. And after CPSIA, so everybody know what happened CPSIA with Mattel, there's a lead issue in toy. The federal government, CPSC, has brought ASTM into the CPSC requirement under CPSIA and become mandatory. The whole purpose of that is to make sure that everybody doing the same thing, that the standard is designed in a way that to cover the safety of toy based on the age grade. So I'm going to talk a little bit about age grading because when we define testing requirement for toy between 0 years old to 14 years old, there might be different way of the children going to play and use and misuse the toy. So we want to make sure the age grading is appropriate when we're testing. So one of the bigger focus of the standard is to make sure we have a good age grading of a toy. So to do that, first, what is the definition of toy? It is a product that is designed and manufactured in a way, and marketing is very important, that is for playing for children under the age of 14 years old, okay? So these, we're using the same photographs, but these are toys. You have a play value. If I have just a pen, a school bag, a children's using it, but there's no play value, it's not a toy, okay? However, under CPSIA, when they define children's product, they use the age of 12 and under. So that's 12 and 14. But I think all of you would agree with me that when you get to that age, between 12 and 14, there's not much different on their behavior when they're using a product. Normally, the biggest difference is when they're 0 to 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, and or the age below 3 years old is normally where the differences is the biggest. However, under ASTM, I want to remind also, there are a bunch of products that is not covered by F963. But it doesn't mean it's not a toy. I want to stress this point. Obviously, if bicycle, tricycle is more of sport equipment. So we don't call it a toy, but they do have their own specific requirement. That's why F963 does not cover the safety of that, because they're not going to spell out all the requirements. We have scooter. Non-power scooter is under another ASTM, so it's not covered in this one. We have things like dart, really, the real one, the lawn dart is not a toy. It's not covered in this particular standard. But we also have playground equipment, the big little tights or outside playground equipment in your garden. Yes, children's play on it, but it's not covered, again, by the F963. So we can go through this, and then we have kites, and we have hobby and craft items, sporting goods. So when we talk about sporting goods, I want to specify, if we have a real football, or badminton, racket, and shuttles, those are sporting equipments. However, we have the miniature size, little ball, tennis ball, you have a shorter racket, it's not intended to play on the real court. Those would classify as toy, and they will fall into the F963 standard. The real one are not. So we need to differentiate them. Now, ASTM as a committee, I'm also part of the committee for the toy standard, has spent years to revise and review the standard. There's 2 to 3 purposes. One, we want to protect the public, because manufacturer, children are different now because they play tablet rather than playing more toys. There's more new technology. We have technology toys. We have more radio control toys. So the way of we play and the toy type is emerging, is different now. Secondly, we want to align internationally. There's always a question, when are we going to align ASTM F963 to ISO 8124, and when are we going to align it with EN 71? So one of the purpose in many meetings is try to align them. And also we look at the hazardous data. In the first section, I talk about recalls. I talk about problems. When there's new problems, emerge, we want to bring them into the standard to make sure we add additional requirement to educate our industry how to design your product in a way that is safe for the public. Okay, so that's since the last one was 2011. It's been 5 years. So they actually published this standard last November. Here is the major significant change between the two versions. They make some changes in chemical requirement, microbiological, physical, electrical, and magnetic, and some labeling and instruction requirements. So for timeline, everybody was, when is this going to be effective? So under CPSIA, because as I say, ASTM is now under CPSIA, when they publish a standard, which was in October, they have to formally inform CPSC. So they did that in November 1st. CPSC has 90 days to respond, to say they accept this newer version to be the law, or they could reject it. I can tell you, possibly, they are going to accept it, because inside the committee, CPSC was sitting next to me. So the CPSC have members sitting also in the committee, so they know all the change. So if they know they're going to reject something, they probably would have rejected when we are voting. So most probably, they are going to accept it. And they actually only have time until January the 29th. So probably in the next 2 weeks, we're going to hear CPSA say, yes, we're going to accept it. So they have 90 days. And once they accept it, they have an additional 90 days. So the whole time is 180 days to make this standard effective. Why the 180 days? Give you a time to make changes to your products, okay? But also give all the third party a time to develop the testing method and also get accreditation. Because remember, ASTM F963, if you test to it, you need to test with a third party. What is a third party? It's a lab that has to be accredited, 17025, and also reported and registered in the CPSC. So when they have a new standard, it needs to give the whole industry a time to respond. That's why the time. But now we're getting near, because I know it's toy fair. You're designing a new toy. I need to start putting orders in there to, for this. So watch this date. We believe it's going to be effective April 29th if CPSC is going to respond in the next 2 weeks. Okay, that's the expected implementation time. So I'm going to go into the detail of what are the changes. Let's see. The first things is chemical. It's not a lot of changes, but there's some. So remember in 2011, they have introduced a new technology called HD-XRF, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy to detect total heavy metals. They allow to detect the total lead in substrate in 2011. Now in this standard, they extend this technology to test to all 8 heavy metals, but only in polymeric materials, homogeneous polymeric, which means plastic. So if you have a toy that has a ABS plastic, pure ABS, or polypropylene PP, or polyethylene, these are homogeneous plastic, now you have a choice. Instead of using the conventional wet chemistry, you can use a choice for the HD-XRF to do your testing. Why? They have done a lot of study and believe to start seeing this technology evolve to be more accurate, more trustworthy as compared to the, and can use as an alternative method to wet chemistry, as well as to save money in a way. Why? Because X-ray, XRF, I don't want to go into the technology, but it's an X-ray light beam onto your sample. So I don't have to cut and scrape and digest in acid and do all the wet chemistry. You can put right under a laser beam to get a detection. But they only allow polymeric material. The reason is all the other material has a problem with the detection and interference. So they only extended it to this, okay? And it covered all 8. So as I mentioned, it used to be just total lead, and now for plastic, you can actually do it for all 8 heavy metals. Under the chemical requirement, they also added a lot of clarifications. Don't know how much you know about this number. This is actually under the CPSIA to actually give exemptions for some of the material like books, books, printing books, some textile, natural material to exempt the total lead testing. They kind of clarify that a bit more into the ASTM standard, especially. They now also add a specific exemption for paper and paperboard on the testing. And they also add additional explanation about sticker, textile material, and metallic. So for sticker normally is a paper printed sticker with adhesive. Those we would consider it as paper and exempted. However, if you have a laminate on top, the laminate is a plastic. So that way, that cannot be exempted. If you have scrapable coating, like a glitter glue on top of a paper, those are scrapable coating, then it means it still have to go through testing. So it add a particular clarification. So you're not, when you look at, is this a paper, is this not, give you the clarification. Textile material. I don't see much in the room that they actually have a printing. So normally you have like a plastic decal print that you can actually scrape it off. It's a piece of substrate. They clarify how we test it. So if you can actually easily separate from the substrate material, so you separate the two, then the coating will have to be tested as well. Because in the past, we exempt textile material, and that gave a lot of confusion in the industry. And then we also have metallic toys and metallic toy component. In the past, if there's a small part component that are metallic, okay, small part because you can swallow the whole thing, they added a cadmium requirement, but they actually added extractable. So now they say if you can do a total analysis that is below 75 ppm, they will assume it will also meet the extractable. So if you have it below, you don't have to go through the extractable test method. But if you're above, then you have to retest it to make sure you are passing the 200 milligram requirements. Now we go into microbiological. So we talked about marker pen earlier. In the ASTM standard, specifically, they have called out cosmetic, liquid, paste, putty, gel, powder. Now, they added an avian feather origin. So I'm sure we all know about SARS and all the other flu requirement, flu issue. It all came from feathers, all came from birds, flu. So now they want to control and making sure if you're using real feather in your toy, the feather needs to be sterilized. It needs to be cleaned before you put onto your toy. So they want to add a micro requirement to make sure those do not contain any bacteria. So that's the first things. They added the feather. They also improved the test method. In the past, we talked about USB 61 and 51. They now added additional references. It doesn't affect you, but it does allow a flexibility. They added a reference to the CTFA, which is a cosmetic toiletry fragrance association requirement. So you can actually reference to that instead of just using USP, because USP is actually for drugs. So you can have additional references or test method if you choose to do that. They also updated the version. So the USP, it used to reference to 24. They just updated to 35. It doesn't affect the testing. It's just a version change. They also added the limit. Again, for those of you who are very familiar with the standard, they used to just say you have to meet the cosmetic requirements, same for the USP, but they never gave you a limit. Now, this time, they really specify very clearly the method to use and also the limit to comply. That's one of the biggest change. And of course, last, they also mentioned something about processed water. So I'll give you the detail right now. So for cleanliness of material. So in your mind, maybe this is USB 61. When you have liquid, paste, powder, feather, you want to make sure this liquid is clean, is no contamination. So it means we want to test it for cleanliness. So when we test it, we actually do micro test to see if there's any bacteria in there. That's the test. We look at it, is there actually any bacteria? So have you contaminated anything you use, is it clean? Now they actually clarify the limit for infant product or anything that contact with the lip or around the eye. You're using the 100 limits. And then the feather is a 5,000 limit. And then any other product that's liquid. So let's say you have a glass globe with the liquid in there, you're meeting the 1,000 limit. The reason I have them in bracket is for calculation. It's a kind of technical because when we do microbial testing, there's a dilution factor, so they allow a factor of 10. And please do not think about this limit like a total lead because it's an exponential curve. So these kind of is just a double. So 100 to 500 is really just 1 and 2. That's what it means. So really not that much difference. In addition, they classify and mention the organism that you have to comply. So you're not supposed to have all this in your liquid products. And they added one specifically for feather because they found this in feathers. So this is additional. Preservative. So we talk about, okay, my liquid, I cannot have mold, I cannot have bacteria in there. But how about if I'm the one, I'm as a user, to introduce the bacteria to it? Does the product have the ability to kill that bacteria? It means preservative, because you introduce it, you want to preserve it. So we talk about preservative effectiveness. So again, they have added specific exemption to say there are products are not normally a good environment for mold growth, so they want to exempt it. So really reduce your testing. Anything that's wax-based, things like lip balm, or anything that's powder very, very dry, they don't think the environment support mold growth, or anything with a very, very acidic or very alkaline, that's the pH value, okay? Bacteria cannot live in that environment. So they actually added this particular section so you can exempt the testing, because they think even if you introduce the bacteria to it, it's not going to live there. They're just going to die. So they don't need you to test for the preservative effectiveness. That's what that's changed. They also very specify the way of sampling, how we sample the product, and how do we calculate, how do we see the mold growth. So for those who doesn't understand microbial, the first one, when we talk about whether we see bacteria in it, we receive your product, we incubate it, and after 5 days, we just look at if anything grow, okay? For preservative, is we purposely introduce a bacteria to it and leave it for 14 and 28 days, incubating, and then we'll come out and see what we introduce. Is it going to die off, or is it going to grow? If it grow, it's a failure, because it means you don't have preservative to prevent it. Okay, that's what it is. And a lot of people say, why does the time take long? Can we do it faster? I cannot control how quickly the mold will grow in that liquid. So no, we cannot do that. Anything else we could accelerate, but I have no ability to accelerate the mold growing. So unfortunately, these tests are very long. However, I want to mention for these tests, normally it's based on formulation. So let's say if you, again, go back to the glass globe, you know exactly what you're putting in. You know the preservative you're going to put in. You know how the percentage. You always use the same formula. On the other hand, you might have a cosmetic or a glue. You always keep the same formulation of that particular chemical or particular liquid. You don't have to repeat the testing every year because you know your formula is working. You don't have to repeat it. However, for USP 61, because whether you introduce the bacteria, we would recommend you test your product every year, simply because it's a production change. Maybe your formulation is good, but people change in your factory. People, how they manage the production, they might actually introduce bacteria to it. But for preservative, it's based on formulation. So a lot of the time, retailer will allow a 5 years report based on formulation. At the same time, the change, they also added specifically this organism. So these are the organism we introduce to it to see whether you're killing it. So the preservative has to be effective for these organisms. And I'm not going to pronounce them because I can't. Okay, processed water. Where do we find processed water? Sometime you have the baby teether, okay, and you put liquid inside. You're not supposed to put any chemical in there. So you should put pure water. And you need to process the water to make sure it's clean, right? Or maybe, I know Glasgow definitely is not pure water because you want to make sure it doesn't freeze. But there might be, I don't know, maybe other product that you might put just pure water. So if you claim you're putting pure water in it, instead of doing the USP testing, you only need to do this too. And again, they never used to specify in detail about the limit. And they only tell us the method. So now they actually put this. So it's less than 10 CFU per mil. And also they make sure the coliform bacteria, this is a particular bacteria, is not present in there. And that's it. Now, we move to physical requirement. This is an interesting one. Does anybody ever ask why ASTM would include a state requirement in there? PA stuffing label has been in there forever. But PA is actually a state, Pennsylvania, in US. And it's a state requirement completely, it's not federal. So why would ASTM put a state requirement in there? That's why they're removing it. Okay, they don't think it's appropriate because ASTM has already been adopted by the CPSC and the federal, at the top, they don't think they should adopt a state requirement into the standard. That's why they remove the reference to it. And they allow, when we are reviewing stuffed toy, the PA requirement is looking at the stuffing, whether it's is clean. And again, I want to share is, in the past, why do we need to do this? Is we know when we manufacture in China or India for stuffed toy, the inside material stuffing is not clean. It could be recycled medical cotton wool. It could be you have splinter, you have wood, you have sand, you have dirt in there. It's horrible, people are hugging it and then you have all those dirt in there. So they have a requirement to make sure the cleanliness. So you open it, visually inspect. Do you have all those dirt in there? But in PA stuffing, they also have a chemical requirement to make sure they're really clean. Not only visually clean. They look white, but it's not clean, okay? So they make sure that's, so for the toy standard purposes, they're now asking us to use a microscope, a simple microscope, to review and make sure they have no contaminant in the stuffing. However, even though ASTM are removing the requirement for PA, but if you are shipping your toy, stuffed toy into PA, the state, you still have to comply to a requirement. So it means to you, it doesn't change anything. It's just where the requirements are stated, okay? The next thing, things that produce sounds, acoustic toy. If you sell globally, you would have noticed ISO 8124 and EN 71 Part 1 has already been improved and added a lot of acoustic requirement in the past 2 years. And ASTM is trying to align with them, so they changed their way of testing to be more aligned with them. One particular change, something called continuous sounds and impulsive sounds. So if you are pressing something, keep beep, it's a continuous sound. Impulsive is bang, 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 okay? That's an impulsive sound. They changed, they no longer require our lab to define what this is. You simply just have to take the measurement. And it's funny because the people who are in Hong Kong, running labs in Hong Kong, the HOCLAS accreditation body already noticed this requirement. And they already told us when we go through the examination to forget about this. You always take the measurement. But ASTM is just making that change. So it means we no longer have to worry about how the sound is. We just measure the sound. So I just want to say the LA peak and the LC peak, the difference is the pitch, how high it is, okay, and how loud it is. So they're looking at two things. Because sometimes it's too high that you cannot hear it, but it's actually hurting your ear. Of course, loudness is another thing. So you only have to worry about these two parameters and not how the sound is being produced. Now, also for push and pull and push toy. There's a lot of confusion when, is a toy having a string? It's going to be a pull-push toy. Now they define it particularly is a toy with a cord or teether or handle, okay? It has to be on the floor, on the ground. You keep pushing it. The child should be in a standing position, so you keep pushing it, and you're walking it. It could produce the click, 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 you keep walking and keep clicking. Those would be a push-pull toy. Okay, if you don't work this way, and of course the child has to be with the toy all the time when you're playing it, because if you just push it, it goes away, that's different. So they actually added a particular definition to make sure we know what it is and better clarity for the industry. And the second thing is they actually changed the way we push it. We used to be pushing it like 2 meters per second. We have to keep that speed when we're testing it. Now they changed it to 1 meter per second. The reason is they realize no kids is going to push that fast. Okay? Seriously. The 2 meters per second is they realize a kid that young with pushing that is not going to every second 2 meters. It's too fast for them. So they just want to make it more realistic of how the toy is being made and how it's being used when we're testing it. That's the change. And they also, they raised one of the limit from 95 to 110, and it's really for the purpose to align with the international standard. Okay? Ryan toys. You all know Ryan toys. Ryan toys, you can have one child Ryan toys. You can have multiple child sitting on the Ryan toys because they give you 2 seats or 3 seats. In the past, the way we test it is if you have a 2-seat, really defined 2 seats for a Ryan toy, we'll test the front seats first, pretending there's one child there, and then we'll test the seats at the back or next to each other, individually. Now they changed it to be more stringent, we should test both seats simultaneously because when the child play on the toy, both of them will be on the toy together, not one after the other because it's 2-seated. So they actually change the way it's testing. Okay, so it means we apply the load when we're doing stability and overload together at the same time. So they add also exemption on the strap waist or restraint Ryan toy. So a child get on a Ryan toy, you give them a safety belt, right? So you don't want them to fall off or injure. But there's also a cord requirement where it's a free length cord. If it is too long, you're worried that it's going to go around the neck of a child. And the problem is normally the restraint strap has that length and extended. So they change it, say first, it's not accessible. No child's going to put that restraint around their neck because it's tied to the Ryan toy. So it means they're going to go around their neck with the Ryan toy on the back, on their neck. It's not going to be possible. So they think the risk is very low. The child is not going to be accessible. And honestly, those products has been sold in the market violating this particular requirement in the market for so long and no incident. So ASTM specifically added this exemption into the standard to exempt that. Okay, we're going to go through a very long section on projectiles. The reason is the biggest change is in this particular section. So first things, what is a projectile? Okay, projectiles mean something is flying. Okay, something flying through air. So particularly, we just made this. So if it is free flying, I think it's going to fly. Sorry. Okay, that's a projectile. However, what is not a projectile? I think this works. Okay, I'm just going to do it here. Sorry, I got that from my child at home. So that is another projectile. Okay, because it flies. That's the third one. I think it does fly. Okay, it flies through. Now, the reason I want to define that, I'll give you an explanation why I'm doing all that. So that is a projectile. Something is flying out. It's projecting, okay, with a mechanism sometime. The first thing is mouth actuated projectiles. I was going to bring in a straw. So mouth actuated projectile means you use your mouth to blow and something is flying out. Can you think about something, if the reason why I want to say a straw is, if I'm going to use a straw to create a projectile, what if I start sucking it? Okay, the projectile is going to go backward and I'm going to swallow it, right? And if there's a small part, as the projectile that's flying through is a small part, if I do the other action, I'm going to choke. So they changed the standard. Is anything that's mouth-actuated projectile, you must have a mechanism to stop the user to suck and have that projectile go straight back to their mouth. That's what the change. So in the past, they didn't have this requirement, and they realized, okay, people is blowing, sucking, and then the toy goes into the mouth, become a choking hazard. So that's changed. You have to have a mechanism to stop it. And then the reason why I was flying that plane is because they also added exemption. Okay. So first, projectile is something that launch in a free flight. I throw that airplane, it's free flight. However, I press that car that goes on the floor. Any floor toys is not flying in the air, but it's supposed to play on the ground surface. It's not falling into the definition of projectile. The reason is two things. They really worry things that are flying who hit somebody's eye and also hit somebody's mouth, so they get choked. Okay? If you're on the floor, it's relatively safe because it's when it's moving. Okay? So what is the update? So they actually added updates on the definition to make sure, okay, a projectile fly in the air. Secondly, if you're using remote control, that's not a projectile because you're controlling it. Because we're worried about uncontrolled projectiles. So if you have a radio control plane, that is not a projectile. At least not in this section anyway. They also define something with a store energy. I just did that. I don't know whether I can do that again. Because there's a mechanism in it. So there's a store energy. Because it doesn't matter my action. The action is the same. It doesn't matter it's me or you pushing this button because it store the energy in there. When I was flying that plane, it's not a store energy because you flying it or you flying it is going to be different to me. So that will be a not store. So they particularly define the store energy requirement to distinguish. Later stage, we're going to talk about what are the requirements for store energy, projectile, and non-store, because the action is very different. Okay, so we talk about stored. So this is also another example for projectile that doesn't have a stored energy. Although it has a mechanism, you have to pull back and fly out the arrow, right? But again, different people using it is going to be use it differently. So it's not the same as this one where you actually have a particular store. So normally these are really a spring mechanism that you push back a gun that you just click. It doesn't matter who activates it. It's the same speed, same distance. Those would be stored. Okay, and that has a different requirement. Now, what really happened with the changes other than just definition? They added this gauge. Okay, so what does it mean? In the past, if you have a hard projectile with the tip is really hard, rigid, we call rigid. Only if you have a rigid projectile, okay, that you have to go through the gauge. And also only for those with a stored energy, we need to go through the gauge. Now, even with a projectile doesn't have a stored energy, will also require to go through this gauge. Because anything that's hard, if they fly out, it's going to hurt somebody's eyes. They just want to make sure you go through this gauge, because this gauge actually defines the sharpness at the point. So you don't want it to be too sharp. Another requirement, they set a minimum length requirement of 57 millimeters. They never had this, and this is actually in the ISO standard and ASTM standard. And they actually went through their violation and hazard incident report in the past 5 years and realized every time when there's an incident, they're also not meeting this particular requirement. So they're adding it back on to make sure we're restricting the length. However, there are exemptions because if you actually have a soft tip on the foam, then you can actually exempt for the requirement. So it's a bit complicated, but it's the big change because it's completely different. However, it's very aligned to the ISO and EN 71. I know projectiles. Now, they also added the requirement. When you have a store energy, they actually defined a energy, 0.08 joules. Okay, so you cannot store more than that. It's because when you're flying out, exceed this joules, you have to have a resilient leading edge. What does a resilient leading edge mean? It means when you're flying the projectile, it should not break off. It should be hard enough not to break off. Because when it breaks, normally it will come out with a sharp point, sharp edge, or a small part. So if you have that much energy in your projectile, you don't want it to break. That's one of the requirements. They also define a maximum energy, because if it is too much, you're going to hurt somebody. So this number, how does it come out? It actually comes out from a study. If anything more than this, it's going to hurt your eyeball. So apparently anything less than this, you should be okay if the projectile hit your eye. So this is a new requirement added and also aligned with the EN standard to protect the public. So when you're flying something out, it's not exceeding this. Okay. They added exemptions for small part projectile that is below 3 years old. They also have, unless it's 100 millimeters. So again, I don't know, because this is actually from a McDonald's from my children. Do you know why there's a string here? Actually, they do it very cleverly, that is below 100 millimeters. So if this component that is the projectile is a small part, okay, you can exempt the requirement if it travel less than 100 millimeters. If it is more, then you have to comply all the other things. So they kind of added this string to make sure, well, it's easy so you don't have to look for it after you fly out, but also restricting so it's not going to hurt somebody, okay? And then if it is not a small part, the requirement is 300 millimeters. So traveling more than that, then you have to comply to the requirement. So, and the rest, they also added an impact test. I think I only have one more slide on projectiles. I know, projectiles. These with blades, okay? What they worry is projectile with a rotor motion with a blade. The edge of the blade is been hurting people, okay? So they want to give the industry some guideline. That's why they added these requirements to tell you how to protect the blade in order not to hurt a child when it's flying, okay? So for example, you want the blade to be curled back, and so at least it's not sharp when it's curled. Maybe you protect the end like this, so when it's flying, it's not going to be cutting through you. So that is what has changed on projectiles. And as promised, no more. I know. I'm going to put this away. So what else has changed? Squeeze toy. Baby squeeze toy, Baby squeeze it on the hand motion. What we find is there's a particular requirement on the gauge. And a lot of the time, this squeeze toy is attached to a ring. So they can attach to their clothes, attach to their stroller, and for other purpose. And they actually clarify that if you actually have that, you only have to test the squeeze toy itself, even if it's attached to the other component. The component should not be subject to the squeeze toy requirement. So they clarify on this particular part. Expanding material. Does everybody know what is expanding material? We have like a pill-sized toy. You put it in water, it expands. Okay, we've seen all those. For European standard, they had added this to the EN 71 or for quite a while, but it's not in ASTM. The problem is children are eating those pills, okay, because they're small, they're small parts. The problem is when they get in and start absorbing liquid, they start expanding either at the neck or at your stomach, the entry to your stomach. But once they get in, that's fine, because they'll get digested. But just stuck in between is a big problem. So they added requirement on expanding material. So the new requirement is if it is a small part, you need to put them in water to expand it to see how much is expanded. If it expanded more than 50% of that original dimension, you need to go through the gauge to make sure. And this area is the entry to your stomach, okay, for a child's stomach, of course. So if you cannot pass through it, it's a failure. Because it means it's just getting stuck, because before it's too small and then it's too big, you are stuck in the middle. If you can go through it, that's fine, actually, because it just goes through and you're not getting stuck. So that's another requirement. Toy chest. Toy chest has been in ASTM F963 in the 08 version, no, not the 08, 03 version, in the 96 version. They removed it in 2007, and now they need to add it back. Because when they turn it into the 08 version of the ASTM standard, CPSC did not accept it, because CPSC say toy chest is a toy. Okay, so when they adopted to CPSIA, they say they want to keep the 07 version with the toy chest in there. And then they accept the rest of the 08. So ASTM's committee just say, that's fine, we're going to put it all back. Okay, so toy chest, simply just put it all back. They did add additional procedure to check the arc travel of the lead. So basically, they just want to avoid the crushing motion when children are opening the chest. Now, battery-operated toy. The new standard, because of the recall you've seen on lithium battery, they specifically add a lot of definition and requirements. The first thing is, because they have to add the requirement, they define battery, a primary and a secondary battery. So I'm going to give you the example. Primary battery, what is a primary battery? Is that those you use it one time, when you finish, you throw bin. You throw it into the bin, you never use it again. Those are primary battery. For secondary, it means rechargeable, so you can use repeatedly. Okay, so they added definition first. Then with the definition, of course, they add new requirements. So all the overheating, short circuit, fire problems are all from the lithium battery. Those are the rechargeable battery. So now they added specific sections to protect this. For any secondary battery, you need to have the battery certified to the battery standard. As I mentioned earlier this morning, if you have a lithium battery operated product, even non-toy, you have to do battery requirements. Now ASTM require you to do this. So your battery need to get certified, get tested. You don't have to test it with the toy all the time, because you normally buy the battery from another third party to put in your toy, as long as the battery actually have the certificate for the battery side. But then as a system, because your battery goes into the circuit and then you have a system, and your toy is also certified with the requirement for the electrical requirement, then you will be good. So that's additional, so based on the standard. They also added a short circuit protection requirement on the battery and charger. So for any removable battery, so you remove and replace our lithium battery, you need to make sure your circuits, so it's the design of the toy, to have avoidance to prevent short circuiting, to create overcharging problems and overheating problems. Again, this is really the understanding of the industry. Mostly, where do you find this? Anything wireless is going to have lithium battery, because you need it wireless. So you don't want to be charging it, right, with the wire. So any radio controlled cars, helicopters, drones, will have, a lot of the time now, will have the lithium battery, and we're very worried about it blowing up in the face of a child. So please notice it. But they also added specifically, again, for these Rion car, if normally it's not lithium, but if you do use lithium, then the requirement will apply to it. Okay, we're getting easy now. I know we're very stressed. Easier requirement for magnet. Do you know why we have a magnet requirement in toys? So about 4 or 5 years ago, there's children who swallow small magnet. okay? And they're very strong. If you swallow one, that's fine, you can pass it out. But they swallow two, slightly at a slightly different time. And they're in a different position in the intestine, and they stick together, okay? And the organ died, and the child died, and I'm not kidding. So they actually prevent product with small magnet that they can swallow, and also magnet that have a strength, very strong strength, that they can actually, when they're in the body, when two of them will stick together. So they're trying to prevent that happening again. You ask me why people are swallowing magnet, I wouldn't know. But it happens, and it's not one. And unfortunately, it's really unfortunate, it's not just one incident, it's more than one. That's why there's a law. In the past, they actually have some exemption about hobby, craft, and science kits. So if you actually have a hobby, like a chemistry kit where you're doing ball and stick, you might actually use the magnet. Those are science kit, you might be exempted. But they actually reduce that. They say only, they only exempt magnetic electrical experimental kits. So other things are not exempted. They're trying to make the exemption less. So because they see those still being a problem. Okay, so they only restrict anything with using magnetism and electricity, then will be exempted. So like electrical motor science kit, that will be exempted from the motor. But you still have a ball and stick kit set, unfortunately they will fall into the requirement and you still have to comply with the magnet requirements. Okay. And then in addition, they want to align. Again, they want to do a lot of alignment with ISO and EN 71. So they added the soaking test. So the idea is if you have a wood product, wood with the magnet inside, if you soak it, or the children's going to put it in their mouth with saliva, the wood might expand, they might actually dilute the glue. The glue might dissolve in those liquid. So they actually want to add a soaking test before we do the testing. So just in case the glue is not good enough, the magnet will come out from the wood. Okay, so that's added. They also add compression, drop, and cycling tests to make sure how to look at the magnet, whether they are removable small part. That's the whole point, to define whether the magnet itself is removable, a small part that somebody is going to swallow it. And they also classify, because the magnet requirement is up to 14. So again, for those of you who know, the abuse testing is only up to 8. So anything above 8, we don't actually have an abuse table for the testing. So they clarify if you're over 8, you use the 3 to 8 years old abuse table criteria for when testing. We're getting to the end because we're going to labeling now. A lot of people have been asking, we have a big change of battery operator, does it affect me? One of the biggest things, other than lithium battery, is button cells labeling. Okay, they just added labeling. If you have a toy using a button or con cells battery with a particular voltage and a particular diameter, then you need to add a warning. Okay. The problem is, normally it doesn't happen. Again, parenting is very difficult. You change battery, you change the toy battery, you remove the battery, you put it on the table. It's button cell, it looks like a candy apparently. So children swallow them. And if you swallow button cell, there's no way to save you, seriously. You can only die. Because once it gets to the stomach, the acid will dissolve the cover, all those chemicals come out. There's nowhere to save you because it's literally exploding there. So there's a lot of death because children swallowing button cells, and they just want to make sure they cover themselves, cover yourself. When you're doing a product, make sure you add a product. It's hazardous if swollen. Please do not leave your button cell, to your children accessible. Okay. And then if the toy does not contain an instruction or label, it's just where you can put this particular warning. It's really telling the parents the danger of button cell, to warn them if they are not aware of it. And I can tell you, we're not talking about Australia, but Australia actually posed a big campaign in Australia just to educate parents. I mean, they can't stop you using button cell in your product because you need to use it. So they have to educate parents, to tell parents, please, please, please do not leave button cell available, accessible to your children, and have them swallow it because it's really, really dangerous. Now, there's a magnetic warning. So they have a particular safety symbol requirement. I'm not going to go through detail. Because we have a toy chest added back, so they added toy chest instruction that you have to add in. Battery-powered Ryan toy instruction. So they added guidance to make sure any Ryan toy, you specify the limit, the weight, the age should be sitting on it. And the kind of surface or any particular warning to be used for the battery or the charger, really just to protect. And then they also modify particular warnings, okay? Because in the past, they actually talk about rechargeable is nickel-cadmium battery in the Ryons, but these days, people are going to start using lithium battery. So these are the additional requirement. And really, lastly, just to remind, because again, for producer marking, because we add back toy chests, we have the additional requirement here. Now, do you want me to continue? Because I'm done with ASTM. We do have appendix, and I think in your booklet, very quickly, to remind everybody, because at the beginning of the section, I keep telling you there's a violation, what's being caught. We have some detail on the US. If you have a record-keeping procedure, these are all the things you need to be in your record-keeping procedure. So other than just the GCC, you need your third-party reports. You need your periodic testing plan or production testing plan, or depending on how you're managing your manufacturing. Making sure all test report, how you do the testing, the number of samples that you select, how do you select your samples, all in your record. If you do have material change during your production, record the material change, because when you make a material change, it will change your requirement. It might change your result from your testing. And last but not the least, the undue influence. This is a very specific requirement, and many people ask, is to make sure that in your operation, people are not giving money under the table to the testing lab or between supplier to give you a pass report. And if you do, you need to allow them to report to CPSC directly. And they also make sure you train your own team, from you as the retailer, the vendor, supplier to the factory. You have to provide proper training. Then they cannot implement an influence to anybody to make you, to gain a pass certificate, because CPSC would not allow that. That's the testing plan. Why, when are you going to use a third-party lab? I'm not going to go through that in detail. And the frequency, how do you design based on your production process, change of design, change of your factory, you have to retest. And last, your routine technical file. Within the technical file, remember something I mentioned about safety. And that's compliance. That's the law. You have to comply to the law, but you're also making sure that your product is safe. And sometimes they do not overlap. So when they don't overlap, you need to go to a third-party notified body to cover a hazard that is not covered in a regulation. You need a third party to help you to evaluate. And when you construct a technical file, these are all the detail that has to be in your technical file. And again, you should be doing it already. And this is just detail for you and how you put in the information and for your productions. Really, 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 last one now. If you don't know who you are in Europe, this is also a chart, really support you. How do you know, am I a manufacturer? Am I the authorized representative? Am I the importer or distributor? You might be all four, you might be one of them. This is your obligation, okay? And remember, things has to be kept for 10 years. Okay. And that's just a bit more. And that's kind of to the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you very much.